Chef Gale Gand. Thank you so much for joining me in my home kitchen. I wanted to make a dessert with you that sounds really complicated, but it's actually quite easy, which is part of why I wanted to show you how to do it. I'm going to make baked Alaska for you in 10 minutes, hopefully. And it's just got a few parts. We need some yellow cake, which I made ahead of time. We need some ice cream, which I've got in the freezer. And then we're going to make a meringue to decorate it with and then toast it with my trusty blowtorch, okay? So let's get started. Let me get the ice cream out of the freezer. And you really can use any flavor at all. You can even use a combination of ice creams and layer them if you want. But I've got this chocolate swirl ice cream that I'm gonna use. So the first thing we need to do to enclose this ice cream in cake is to cut a base for it, the size of the hunk of ice cream. So I just used the lid of the ice cream as my little sort of pattern to know how big a circle of cake to cut. So I'm going to put that on the plate. And you know, basically what baked Alaska is just ice cream surrounded by cake, covered in meringue, and then toasted. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to take this ice cream out of here. I want to try to get it out whole. So let's use a serrated knife, and I'm just going to cut right through the packaging because it's cardboard, it's paper. So you want to use an ice cream that's not in plastic if you can, if you want to build it this way. And I'm just going to peel away the paper so I have this whole sort of plug of chocolate ice cream. So just take the paper off, and now we're going to go ahead and plunk it right on top of the cake, okay? Next thing we want to do is make the walls of cake to surround it. So, you know, really it doesn't matter how many patches or pieces of cake you use to enclose it. You just want to enclose it because the magic of baked Alaska is that it's a toasted meringue, sort of a hot meringue on the outside, but frozen on the inside. So let's cut some pieces of cake. I've got some scrap here left from the bottom. So I'm just going to cut some triangles, and what we're going to do is kind of go up the side of the cake and kind of over the top. That's the hope. All right, so let's see if we have enough cake to do that. I'm going to cut some triangles. I think this piece of cake is a little longer than I need it, but let's go ahead and cut some triangles. And then if there are some bald spots, we can always just go back and fill in with more cake. It doesn't have to look pretty. It just has to be completely covered so that it's protected when you start toasting it with meringue. So just kind of use your hands and work the cake around. Kind of give it a push so it kind of tucks the cake and pushes it right into the ice cream to enclose it. Okay? And once we've got it covered with cake completely, then we're going to put it in the freezer so it can rest for a little bit, and then we'll make the meringue to cover it. So if you see any little spots, like I've got one little peekaboo spot right there, let's go ahead and just cut a little sliver of cake. And I'll just stick it in that spot, cover it up, and that's great. If you wanted to do it up until this point, you totally could, and then you could put it in the freezer, and maybe the next day, or when your guests are coming, if we can ever have guests again, cover it with the meringue and then toast it. But I'm going to do it from start to finish. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the freezer. That's probably the hardest part of the dish, is to find room in your freezer for that cake while you make the meringue. So if you can do that, you've got the hardest part done. All right, let's go ahead and make the meringue, which is just equal parts of egg whites and sugar. First, we're going to whip up the egg whites, and they're room temperature right now. The main thing when you're making meringue is you just want to make sure there's no fat or water anywhere, like inside your bowl, on your whisk attachment, maybe even like up on your mixer, like look under it, make sure it's clean, make sure there's no buttercream or whipped cream from the last time you were making something. And then I've got a half a cup of egg whites. They're left over from some project I did, like a creme anglaise or something. So we're going to go ahead and mix that up, whip that up on high till we get soft peaks. It takes about a minute. And right now what it looks like is kind of like bubble bath. So the first thing that's going to happen when you're making meringue is you get these like big sudsy bubbles. Those tell you that your egg whites are in good shape, that there's no fat in them, there's no fat in the bowl. They're going to whip up just fine. If for some reason by this point you don't have bubbles, something's up, and it's time to start over. Okay? It Mine's looking really good, and I'll show you in a second. We're going to whip this to soft peaks, which means when I pull the whisk attachment out, there will be a soft peak right at the tip of it. And it goes through a couple stages. The bubbles are getting smaller now, and it's getting sort of fluffier, and you see some lines left behind from the tines of the mixer. And it's probably tripled or quadrupled in volume at this point. So let me show it to you. If you do overmix it, you can still kind of rescue it. Once we add the sugar, it sort of fixes it. But there's the meringue, and let's see if we get a soft peak. Yes, we do. So see how I've got like a nice little bit there, a little peak, and then when I lift it up, it kind of leans a little. That's soft peak. If it stood straight up, that would be stiff peaks, which we don't really need to go that far, because then we're at risk of breaking the egg whites. But even if we did break the egg whites, the fact that we're pouring sugar in, it'll bring it back together, so no worries. So let's go ahead and raise the bowl, and then I'm going to turn it on low and just add the same amount of sugar. So we have a half a cup of egg whites, and now I'm adding half a cup of granulated sugar. So you remember how stiff it was before, right? All of a sudden it's actually going to get less stiff again. It's going to get kind of loose but shiny. And what's happening is the sugar is finding free water, because egg whites are protein and water, that's all they are. It's finding the water in the egg whites and using it to dissolve. So it's sort of turning the sugar into a liquid or a syrup. And in that process, the sugar dissolves, but it also becomes kind of elastic and almost chewy, you know, sort of like corn syrup is kind of chewy and elastic. That's what's happening to the sugar in there. So it becomes very flexible, it gets kind of shiny and glossy, and the sugar's dissolved. Now, the way to test if the sugar's dissolved is we can take a little bit and just taste it. Now, I still hear a crunch between my teeth, so that tells me that the sugar's not dissolved yet, and it's not ready. The other thing you can look at is how stiff is it, because we want to get soft peaks again. But right now you can see it kind of falls from the whisk attachment, and if I try to get a peak like we had before, cannot do it. So that means we need a little more time in the mixer. And then we can use this to frost the whole thing. We're going to do a little piping, and then we'll toast it with a low torch. Baked Alaska, I believe what they say is that the first one was seen the year that the purchase happened. So America purchased Alaska from Russia for 2 cents an acre. And that year, which was 1867, some restaurants wanted to commemorate the sale or the purchase by inventing this dessert called Baked Alaska. So the first place they claim to have seen it was at Anton's in 1867 in New Orleans, but that's who invented it. But they can't really prove it. So, but that's the story. And I just want to let you know, I have a virtual cooking school now. If anyone wants to take a cooking class with me, I have a cooking school called Kitchen Sisters Cooking School. You can go to it online and sign up for virtual classes, and we can do this again. We can cook together in the kitchen again. I do all kinds of different classes, pastry ones, dinner, Mardi Gras, all kinds of stuff. I've got a sausage and lentil class coming up. So maybe I'll see you in the kitchen again. Well, let's check and see now. I'm thinking that the meringue is probably ready. And you'll see how different it looks. Let's see. So now when I pull it out, it's not dripping down from the whisk attachment. Before it was like liquidy and coming down. And if I turn this up, yep, I got a soft peak. So we're there. We're perfect. I could test it to see if the sugar is still, you know, if there's any grains, but I highly doubt it. Because if there were, it wouldn't have that texture. All right, next thing we want to do is kind of frost the whole thing to cover it, and then after that, we're going to do some piping. So let's go ahead and get the piping bag ready. Just going to fold down the collar of my piping bag so it stays nice and clean. And the tip that I picked, let's do a star tip. This is like a medium star tip, so we'll get some nice ridges on whatever designs we put on there. And then you just want to throw it in your bag. Make sure someone's watching you when you do that because you look super cool. And just in case you're worried the meringue's going to come out the bottom because of gravity, I just twist the bag, shove it in there, and now nothing can come out. So I'm going to put some of this in the bag, but I need to save some of it to just spread, you know, with a spatula. So how much? Maybe like Okay, 4 spoonfuls or spatulas full. And I'm just gonna unfold that top edge, gather it together, kind of press out any air we've got in there, and this is ready to go. So let's go ahead and get the Alaska out of the freezer. And the nice thing about this, I'm going to make this with you now, but after I'm done, I can put it back in the freezer and serve it tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. Actually, when I was at the pump room, I used to be the pastry chef at the pump room, we had like 20 of these in the freezer at all times, because this is what we served people when they came in to celebrate their anniversary. So we'd pull out a baked Alaska. All right, I'm just going to use like icing spatula, kind of spread this down. Now the nice thing about baked Alaska is you kind of want ridges in your meringue. So it's not that you want it super smooth. The ridges actually make much prettier toasting than if it was very, perfectly smooth. So I'm going to need a little more to cover that bottom edge, which is about what I've got here. I'm going to put it on top and then we'll spread it down. Okay. So let's see. So you just want to get it entirely covered so that you don't see any cake. That's the goal. Okay. You want to cover the cake completely. But later, because we are going to pipe, if you did have a bald spot somewhere, you could completely hide it. You know my mantra, if you can't fix it, hide it. So feel free to, if there is a bald spot, that's where you're going to put one of your rosettes. Okay. Let's see if I can get this all spread. I need a little more, so I've got a little gap back there. So let's just put a little more there. Still got a little meringue left in my bowl, so we're good. Scoop it out with my spatula. There we go. Looks like shaving cream, doesn't it? Tastes way better than shaving cream. Another way to cook with me, if you don't want to take one of my Kitchen Sisters cooking classes, every Thursday morning on Facebook Live, I actually do a live cooking class. And that one's free, 10 o'clock Central Time, every week. I've been doing that all during quarantine. It's actually called my Quarantine Cooking Class with Survival Tips. So it kind of helps people get through the quarantine. So feel free to show up there. One week we cook savory stuff, the next week we cook something sweet like desserts. All right, so I've got that Alaska all covered, but now we're going to do the decorative part. Let me just pull that tip out, squeeze some of that meringue down, and let's just put a few fancy like rosettes and little swirls on it. And really you can pipe anything, whatever you feel comfortable doing is fine. So I'm doing some like big swirls. I'm going to do a rosette on the top. Let's do, I'm going to do some hearts on the side. I know we're past Valentine's Day, but hearts are always appropriate, especially in baked Alaska, because it's a very celebratory thing and often used for people's anniversaries to celebrate. So I still have a little bit more in the bag. Let's just do some little shells around the bottom, just to kind of finish off the edge. But feel free to just, keep piping till you've used all your meringue up. And if you're not comfortable with a pastry bag, I just want to remind you, you've been using one your whole life, and it's a toothpaste tube. It's the same thing. It's just, a tube to get goo from one place to another. And I'm sure you guys do like nice shells on your toothbrush when you're getting it ready to brush your teeth. How's that look? All right, let's go ahead. Ready to toast it? Lighting up the blowtorch. Fire up your torch. And now I'm just going to move that torch all around to toast the meringue. If you don't have a blowtorch, feel free to fire up your oven about 500 degrees, and you can put it in there. You want the oven really hot so it doesn't spend too much time in the oven. There we go. Oh my God, look at those lines. Look how they came out. Oh, I love this. Look at that. Can you see all those beautiful lines from the piping? See that? That's baked Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight at the Thrive Benefit. Really appreciate all your help that goes to the homeless. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hope to see you in the kitchen again.